Thank you very much indeed, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you today. I want to do 4 or 5 things really this morning. There's 4 or 5 elements to my vision about where I believe volunteering can go if we really get our act together and capitalise on what I think is a really good time in many ways for volunteering. I think we're pushing against open doors. I think the climate is very much in our favour, but there are some challenges that we really need to address and grapple with if we're going to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that exist. And so there'll be some challenges for all of us, I think, certainly for Volunteering England, for local infrastructure organisations, for funders, for government, and for all of those in our society that are interested in this great movement of ours and seeing if we can take it to its next stage of development. The first part of my vision is I would like to live in a society which really values and recognises the contribution that volunteering makes to all of our lives and the communities around us. I think the evidence is there. I think we need more of it, but I think we need to shout more about the contribution and the value that volunteering makes. And I just want to rehearse, I know we all know this, but I just want to rehearse with us as a kick-off just what a difference volunteering makes to the world around us. And there's 4 or 5 elements, I think, of that. The first is the contribution that volunteering makes to the individual person who is volunteering their time. And I make no apologies for starting with that rather than with the recipients of the volunteering, and I'll come on and talk about the social benefit of volunteering in a moment. But it often used to be said, and volunteering used to be put forward as a gift relationship with people doing good for other people out of altruistic reasons. And there's nothing wrong at all with altruism, I don't want to denigrate it. Lots of people who get involved in volunteering do so because they want to make a difference in the community and in the lives of those around them. But I think volunteering is much better expressed as an exchange relationship based on reciprocity, with the individual volunteer getting just as much out of that relationship as they put into the community. And therefore I think it's worth starting, when we talk about the value of volunteering, to the value to the individual volunteer, what they get out of it. And there's numerous research studies that have been carried out, which I don't want to go into, but they show that volunteering is good for the individual. It's good in terms of a sense of well-being. There's research that's out that shows that volunteering is good for health, both in terms of mental well-being and in terms of physical health. It's clearly good for learning new skills and topping up existing skills and positioning yourself, whether you're a young person leaving school or university or somebody who's unfortunately lost their job as a result of recession. Volunteering can be a great way in terms of learning new skills, keeping yourself busy, providing a structure to your working day that will hopefully enable you to take advantage of the situations that appear when the job situation picks up. And Volunteering England has been involved over the past 6 months or so with the DWP in terms of setting up a new brokerage scheme, and we might want to talk about that in the question and answer session, because I know it's problematic, and unfortunately volunteer centres aren't involved throughout the country in the way that Volunteering England would like them to do. But I think the fact that a big government spending department like the DWP has recognised for the first time the contribution that volunteering can play in terms of getting people back into work is something that we need to hold on to, and we can address and deal with some of the challenges and the problems that that scheme has given rise to, as I say a bit later on. So volunteering is worth celebrating. It has a value, and it has a value to the individual person that's volunteering. It is also, of course, has a huge contribution to make in terms of the health of our local communities. Throughout the Southwest, volunteers are absolutely pivotal, essential, I would say, in terms of making a society, making a community that's a good place to live, that looks after those people who are vulnerable in our society, that takes issues like climate change seriously. Volunteers are at the forefront of all of those sorts of activities that are going on. I was at a conference recently organised by the Police Support Volunteer programme, which is a complementary service to the Special Constabulary, which is probably better known, but police support volunteers and non-uniformed volunteers that go into and work both internally within the police force, providing internal support to paid police officers, but also go out and play a really important role in terms of bridging between the police force and the community, outreach work, talking in schools. Deputy Chief Constable of Devon Police Force who has been pretty instrumental in terms of getting this up and running, and is looking to double the numbers of police support volunteers within the Devon Constabulary. And the point that he was making was that one of the new government targets in terms of looking at the success of the police force is around levels of trust and engagement with the local community. And he was saying that, in his view, and I absolutely agree with him, one of the best ways of building that trust is for having citizens to go into the police force and to speak out for the police. And I was particularly struck by that, and I think that's a very powerful message that we need to hold on to, that volunteers aren't just about providing services, important role that is, and I noticed that you've got a debate this afternoon around the whole issue of the voluntary sector becoming more involved in public service delivery, and clearly volunteers are heavily involved in that as well, and there are clearly some big issues in relation to that, which I'm sure will come out this afternoon. But volunteers are involved in service delivery, and not just through the voluntary sector, but through the public bodies as well, heavily through public bodies as well. They do make a really important contribution in terms of delivering essential services. But over and above that, I think, they have a more fundamental role to play, which is about developing trust and confidence in our public institutions, in our public bodies, like the police, like the health service, like the education service. And therefore volunteering, I think, has a huge value to play in terms of the health of our local communities. Thirdly, and I've already mentioned the DWP programme, but I want to take it wider than this. Volunteering has an absolutely pivotal role to play in terms of the economic well-being of our community, not just the social well-being, but the economic well-being of our community. I noticed from some of the material that was sent to me that here in the Southwest you've done some calculations about the value of volunteering, the economic value of volunteering to the Southwest. We at Volunteer in England have tried to come up with a figure, a headline figure about the contribution that volunteers make to the economy of the UK, or to England. And it puts it at a staggering, I mean, estimates vary, but one of the estimates that I've seen puts it at a staggering £40 billion. If all the work of volunteers was to be paid at a minimum wage or an average hourly wage rate, it would equate to something like £40 billion, which, when this particular piece of work was being carried out, if volunteering had been seen as an industry, alongside transport or other industries in our country, volunteering as an industry would have been something like the third largest contributor to gross domestic product. And that just really brings home to us that volunteering, of course, has a huge social value, but it also has an important, massive economic contribution to play. One of the bits of research, as you heard, I used to head up the Institute for Volunteering Research, and have long taken an interest in studies that look at volunteering and how it's developed and the contribution that it makes. And one of, I think, the most interesting studies that's been carried out over the past 20 years or so, and it wasn't actually looking at volunteering itself, but it was encompassing the whole notion of people working in their communities on a voluntary and collaborative basis, was some of the work that Robert Putnam carried out in the States. Some of you may be more familiar with his work in the US, Bowling Alone, which was his social capital thesis. And Robert Putnam, whilst he didn't invent the notion of social capital, was heavily influential in terms of pushing it as a theory. And the whole notion of social capital, really, I mean, it's a jargonistic term, but if you deconstruct it, what it's about is about those relationships in the local community, those social relationships that help to build trust and reciprocity and make our communities work better. And I like it because it gets people thinking, because alongside economic capital, we can talk about social capital as well, and it's sort of talking the language that economists and government understand. But the study that I particularly liked was this study in Italy, I think it was in the 70s or early 80s, called Making Democracy Work. And what he set out to do was to look at the health of social capital in Italian communities, and he found that in certain areas it was much richer in social capital than in other parts of Italy. The same is true in our country as well, richer in volunteering, richer in social capital than in some other parts of the country. But the interesting thing in terms of the economic relationship was that those areas that were richest in social capital were also the most economically successful. And whilst we haven't got time to go into that relationship in detail, I think it's really instructive, because what it's saying is that by making those connections between individuals and citizens, not only can it help provide services, not only can it build trust and confidence in our public institutions,